Hey guys, today we'll be working on another code in Python. We'll be continuing the video tutorials today, so we'll be going over, this is a continuation of last time, so just the same idea with the sentinels. So I think we're going to do, so I think we had retail without validation, or the supermarket, the market question. So now we'll do some validation with the same code actually. Then we'll do some nested loops after that. I should have kept that code here. So let's see what we have here. So we have markup points to 2.5. We have another points to y. So another str points to y. Well, another is equal to lowercase y, or another str is equal to uppercase y. And we'll say wholesale points to float, get a wholesale cost. So here we can check to make sure so this is one way to check that the number is not negative. So this is input validation. It's a way for to do error checking, as we mentioned in the last video that we could have done some error checking. So this is one step of error checking. Also, you can check. One thing would be to check for null values. So a null value is pretty much nothing. So we'll do that later on. And then null is pretty much not an object. I think it has the same meaning in Python. So basically, check for null, check that it's not negative, check that it's not a float if you want, check that it's an int. We could do that. We could check that it's not a string or a character, all that stuff. Check that the user didn't enter nothing yet, that would be null. So in code, in coding, you have to check if you're doing app designing, anything. You have to make sure all those use cases, all the possible possibilities, you have to sometimes restrict them to just one. So that can be not a challenge, but it's just something you have to do. So once you get used to it, then you'll understand. So here we'll have, we'll check that wholesale, we'll have another while loop. So a nested while loop. So I'm not sure if we did nested loops yet, so this will be a nested loop example. So we'll have a loop within a loop. So remember that the loop inside is always going to iterate first, then the outside loop. If the inner loop's like a for loop iterating to 10, all those iterations are going to complete before the outer loop does one full iteration. Or to the next iteration. So all 10 iterations have to happen on the inside loop before the outside loop can complete one iteration, if that makes sense. So if the outside loop's going to loop twice, that means the inside loop will loop 20 times if it's 0 to 10, or 0 to 10, or 1 to 10, which is 0 to 9. So here we'll say enter the item's wholesale cost, which is what we have. And then here we'll check while wholesale is you could say not equals here to 0, or you could say while wholesale is greater than 0, but here the example here is while wholesale is less than 0. Then print. We'll do an error prompt. You can return -1. We could define this via value returning function, which we'll do within the next few videos. No, yeah, pretty much. But instead of returning a value here, we'll just say the cost can't be negative. So just adding a new line there, and then we'll have is that about it? I think that is it. Actually, no, there might be just a little bit more here, so we'll just check what we have. So we have wholesale, is that all so we had? Sorry, just double checking what I have here. So we have our wholesale initially gets input after the while loop, the first while loop. Then we say while wholesale is less than 0, print while wholesale is less than 0. We could print the cost cannot be negative. Then we can prompt them again here for this line here. We can ask them again, because if it's wrong, then we can get them to enter it again. So we could say, okay, well, enter it again. I believe we could try that. We could have an if here. Just to make sure that we're really that wholesale really was less than 0, we could just double check. It probably pretty much always is. And if you wanted to speed up this code, you could just take this line out. But just to show what we can do here, is that we can have while wholesale is less than 0. If it is less than 0, we get into this condition, this loop here. Print the error prompt or the error alert message. The cost can't be negative. We could say re-enter here. So yeah, so we print here the prompt error. The cost can't be negative, or the message, the alert. Then we have, okay, if wholesale is less than 0, then we'll proceed down here. Wholesale points to, we get a wholesale. Then after that, of course, we loop back up to the condition. So it comes under here, back up here, back under there to the while loop here. It's going to check, okay, is wholesale less than 0? If it's not, continue to re-enter it till we get something that we want, like on normal systems. Then here we have, so once it meets the condition that it's not, once this condition is false, which means our wholesale is greater than 0, then we proceed down here, which is what we want. We could have done this backwards. We could have said while wholesale is greater than or equal to 0. We could have writ the that's probably the way I would have done it, to be honest. I would have probably said while wholesale is greater than 0, then proceed. If it's not, then exit and restart, something like that. You can do them different ways, obviously. Depends on the coder, depends on the programmer. They all do things differently. You just want to make sure you're doing something that's going to be okay. So it can all depend, right? We could do this 10 different ways. 2 of them may be right, whereas 2 of them could be the exact same thing, just oppositely. So yeah, So you'll see that later on when we start doing some projects, coding projects. We'll show perhaps some harder examples. We'll show how to do those. Excuse me. I still have some coding projects to upload for C, and I still have those Android videos up to which I will start those pretty soon here. So the cost can't be negative. So you guys get the idea. So let's just check. I'll just check if this is everything here. So we got in that loop there. The error loop reset the variable. Yeah, that should be alright. So let's just set the breakpoint there. I have a breakpoint up there, and I'll hit Control S to save it, and then I'll click the debug icon. We'll just run through this through the debugger. So here we have markup points to 2.5. We'll step over. Another str points to lowercase y, while another str is equal to lowercase y, or another str is equal to uppercase y. So it does meet one of the conditions. Therefore it's true. We step into the loop. Wholesale points to float, enter the item's wholesale cost. So I'll step over that, and I'll enter something here. So let's just say it's like $100. While wholesale is less than 0, that'll get skipped because we could also have checked for a string here. We could have checked for tons of everything here, basically, in this checking loop. So you can have a checking loop, or you can just have a checking code. So if the checking code initially doesn't work, then you get them to do it again. So if you can just do this different ways. Yeah, so we'll show you some examples of that later on, how we could do this, how we could change this. So here we say retail. So you guys know this part. We did this in the last video. So if you're not sure about this, just see the last video in the playlist. Should be titled Part 1. So we'll exit this. We'll restart just to show what happens if it's less than 0. We'll step over all these. I'll enter something. So if I enter like -100, hit enter. While wholesale is less than 0, I'll step in. So now this condition is true because it's a negative number. So wholesale takes a float. So now if we enter a negative float or negative int, then in this case, this loop becomes true because our number is less than 0, right? We have a -100. We can see that -100. And then here so we're going to print an error message. I'll step over that. Error, the cost can't be negative. If wholesale is less than 0, we're going to step in because it is. Again, that's condition's true because wholesale is less than 0. If we see our variables, wholesale is less than 0. Condition was met there for the if. We stepped into the if. And now we have, okay, well, wholesale points to float. So again, it's re-enter the wholesale cost. Step over that. Enter something here. -200, hit enter. So we loop back up. While wholesale is less than 0, we'll step in. Because again, it's false. This condition is false. We step into the loop here. It was the wholesale is less than 0. Print. Again, error, the cost can't be negative if wholesale is less than 0, which it is, of course. So this if is always going to get hit. So you don't really need this if, since we already have a condition here. So we could take this out to make this code run like a split of 1,000,000 seconds faster, or 1,000th of a second. But it all adds up. Yeah, so we could take this line out. Sometimes it's even longer than that though if it's a loop. But since it's an if, won't make that much of a difference. But anyways, we could take this if out to make it slightly faster. Since wholesale is always going to be less than 0 if we're at this point of the code anyways. But anyway, so we step in. Wholesale is less than 0. Now we're going to re-enter wholesale. Enter 100. Hit enter. While wholesale is greater than 0. Less than 0. This time it's false because it's greater than 0. Now this whole loop got skipped because this condition was false until the indentation is finished. So here, back up here, it lines up with this while loop. It shows us here in pycharm that the loop ends here with this line. So now we have retail points to wholesale times markup, so it gets us a calculation on our variables. Retail comes up. Print the retail price. Retail price $250. Another SDR. Do you have another item to process? Enter wire N. We'll hit N. Hit enter. And the code's done. So there you go. So we'll move on to the next. We'll move on to the next code. So we'll just move on to the next one. Actually, we might just stop it there. Just because we're going on to nested loops. We did have a nested loop here, but we'll do a little bit of a harder example in the next video. Actually, yeah, I think we do have one more nested loop example, so we'll get into nested loops again. We'll go nested loops part 2. Yeah, so we'll see you guys in the next video. If you guys want to see more programming videos and investing videos, you can subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.